It's universally recognized that it's better to have good relations with Russia than not to have good relations. We want that Ukraine is not used as a playing card in the geopolitical games between the West and the East.
More than a playing card, it's now a field of battle, it would seem. Bezan is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defense and joins us from Winnipeg. Sir, all kinds of developments. It seems that things have boiled over yet again in Ukraine. What are your latest thoughts?
Well, it's really disgusting to see how this is played out by the Yanukovych government, how they've targeted innocent protesters that, for the most part, have been extremely peaceful, that there is now reports of upwards of 60 peaceful protesters and police that have been killed in the clashes this week. And, you know, at the same time, we're extremely skeptical of any move or a proclamation of a truce coming from Yanukovych's office. This is an individual who said that he was going to sign the agreement with Europe for closer economic and trade relations, and then just 2 days before the Vilnius agreement was supposed to be signed, walked away from it and crawled into bed with Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. And he's the man that has said that we're going to have peace on the streets as long as there's an amnesty offered to all protesters. And just when protesters started to leave government buildings earlier this week, he escalated the violence. So Canada is extremely concerned about the situation. We condemn all the violence, but we want to hold everyone to account. Minister Baird has been in very close communications with all his European counterparts, especially with Poland, and also talking to the United States. And as Prime Minister Harper and President Obama said yesterday, coming from Mexico, that we are going to hold everyone to account that has created so much bloodshed, unnecessary violence, and Yanukovych cannot rule by just being brutal. We have to move towards respecting democracy and the civil liberties of these great Ukrainian people.
What are our diplomatic options, though? For instance, we don't have a lot of trade with Ukraine.
Yeah, from a Canadian standpoint, other than having a very large Ukrainian community here in Canada of 1.2 million Canadians, and I'm proud to call myself a Ukrainian Canadian and proud of my heritage, but we're all extremely disappointed in how things have escalated over the last few months in Ukraine. So it is coming back to the reality that Canada is going to continue to lead. We are the first country to come up with a major initiative in putting in a travel ban on high-level ranking authorities from Ukraine. We are looking at expanding the sanctions against the Ukraine, but in reality, most of the money that the oligarchs and the Yanukovych government has had in their personal bank accounts are in bank accounts in Germany, in Switzerland, in London, in Paris, in Cyprus, and Austria. And so essentially the European Union, if we want to start really getting the attention of the leadership in Ukraine, they're going to have to move in lockstep with Canada and other like-minded nations.
Are we currently providing aid at all to the protesters?
Yeah, so that is a great point, and it was part of our budget, and we've increased the amount of funding now available to provide medical aid to all of the peaceful protesters that have been hurt. There's now hundreds of people across Ukraine, not just in Kiev. These clashes are taking place in cities from east to the west, and from Kharkiv and Donetsk all the way to Lviv. And so we are providing medical supplies to help with the field hospitals that have been set up. Everybody is scared to go into their regular hospitals now because there has been military police and the Berkut, the riot squads, following protesters who have been beaten and hurt to hospitals and kidnapping them from the hospitals or as they're entering the hospitals and taking them away for allegations that they've been tortured and further abused by officials.
You know, it's interesting. We take the approach of encouraging the EU to provide sanctions. Are we also having a dialogue with Russia? Because it seems that Yanukovych has tacit approval from Russia.
Well, definitely that is the concern, is the Russian play here, as Yanukovych went and met with Putin just last week. You know, Putin has been influencing Yanukovych and how he moves forward. There was a transfer of a couple of $2 billion from Russia to Ukraine just at the beginning of this week to help, well, supposedly to help them with their financial crisis, but I'm concerned that those dollars are being used to fund the police and military action that is being mounted against the Euromaidan protesters.
Okay, I want you to stay there for a couple of minutes. I want to continue this discussion, James. Thank you very much for sitting in. We'll be right back in 2 minutes.
There's a strong instruction to the police not to use offensive means against the protesters.
That's the Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Minister saying that the soldiers were instructed not to use violence, for instance. James Bezan joins us, Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of National Defense, and we began our discussion by saying that you hold the government responsible. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister is saying he's not responsible, and they instructed the military otherwise. What is your take on that?
Well, there's eyes on the ground. We still have our diplomatic corps in Kiev and across the country, and we're working with other embassies and other foreign observers that are there. And we are keeping note of everyone that is responsible for the violence that has taken place. And despite what the Ukrainian government is saying, live ammunition has been used. There is multiple protesters now that have been shot, often innocent bystanders, and some of those videos have been posted onto YouTube and reported in the media. And so it is very disheartening to see this violence. You know, the biggest concern that I think everybody has is, where is this headed? And as Canadians, we're concerned, and as a government, we'll continue to lead in bringing both the proper diplomatic and other type of sanctions that we can force upon Ukraine. But this is starting to devolve into an authoritarian regime, and the opposition parties and the protesters are saying that the dictatorial powers that are concentrated in the hands of Yanukovych have to be revoked and need to move back to the Constitution of 2004. And I guess the biggest concern is the influence that is coming from the north, from Russia, and whether or not we're going to see more of an imperialistic relationship again between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, it's interesting. The spokesperson for the foreign ministry in Russia has indicated we could be looking at a civil war, and so is the Polish prime minister, and so is the former president of the Ukraine. If it escalates, as you're describing, or expected to happen, what is Canada's response?
Well, again, there's a big meeting happening today in Europe of European foreign ministers, along with Minister Baird. And I know Minister Baird and Minister Sarkowski from Poland are very much leading the discussion as to how Europe and the West and other like-minded countries can intervene. We want to get back to a peaceful discussion to see all violence ramp down. And, you know, it all comes down to goodwill. I believe that the opposition parties, I believe that the protesters are prepared to step back and allow negotiations to take place, as long as it's moving to a proper end goal. And what I'm concerned about is what happens after Sochi, what influence does the Russian government have with Yanukovych, and where Yanukovych may go after this point in time. So the European Union is the big player here, along with the United States, and we are going to be on the front of that in bringing forward the proper diplomatic pressures to change the attitude of Yanukovych and his government.
The Canadian embassy is shut, as I understand it, second day in a row. So two questions related to that. A, wouldn't it offer refuge to some of the protesters, for instance? And is that a role that the embassy could play in the first case? And in the second case, does it affect the communications component of talking face-to-face to put pressure on the Ukrainian government?
Well, our ambassador there has been very engaged with all players in this whole conflict, from the protesters, the opposition, to the government. And all like-minded embassies are working very collaboratively together. Now, as a lot of Canadians know, the embassy is shut down because there is a number of protesters that have sought refuge there now. We are encouraging them to actually leave. The police that were in pursuit of them have left, and that they can peacefully leave at this point in time. Everything is secure in the embassy. These people are definitely peaceful, and so we're not concerned from that standpoint. As to our embassy isn't set up to be a field hospital or a place to give refuge to the thousands of people that right now are looking for asylum. So we have to be realistic here, and we'll be working with our allies on how we get proper medical supplies onto the front lines to help those field hospitals, to help treat the people that have been injured through the conflicts. And then we'll have to evaluate where this thing goes and how, the Ukrainian people realize their aspirations of getting back to peace and democracy and the respect for the rule of law, as well as their civil liberties.
Sir, you look at the Canadian government and the role it's playing, but Canadians of, Ukrainian descent, if you will, are all worried. What can an individual do to assist in this process?
Well, I know that a number of Ukrainian organizations across Canada are taking donations and funneling them into organizations that are providing the medical supplies on the streets of Kiev and other cities where these protests have been taking place. So I encourage you to contact organizations like the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, the League of Ukrainian Canadians, and as well as the professional business clubs of Ukraine that are across Canada, including here in Winnipeg. So, contact those organizations. They are charitable organizations, and they are in the process of taking some of these dollars and moving them over to Ukraine to help supply the protesters with the medical supplies, as well as clothing and food, which are so desperately needed at this time. Because as you can see, infrastructure has been impacted. The ability to move around the country has been impacted. Check stops have been established across the country by both the protesters as well as the government, depending on what part of the country you're in. And so getting food and supplies in are becoming logistically more difficult. But we, again, want to make sure that the people that are on the front lines are getting the supplies they require.
Indeed. James Bezan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on, Pat.
Yeah. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defense of Ukrainian descent, I'll point out as well.